Hello, my favorite students. Today is the last day I will be absent, crossing our fingers. So, I will be back in class tomorrow and back on Zooms. So, woohoo! But until then, I do have some things for you to complete. Don't forget your previous two assignments, the something to ponder and also the identifying bias in the three little pigs. All of that is due digitally by Friday by 11:59 p.m. And for the in-class students, I'm going to have a way for you to turn it in digitally as well, but those will probably be due before the end of the day on Thursday, since Friday is a holiday. So, we've been talking about bias. We know that bias is an assumption that we predetermine or we preconceive about people. It can be based on their gender, their race, their culture, their profession. So it can be based in a lot of ways. We all have them. And we experience some biases within many different forms and ways throughout the real world. So that's what I want to talk to you about today, is bias in the real world. So when it comes to bias, we have reviewed what it is, what it looks like in text, and even watched a discussion that discussed bias in general. This should give you a decent grasp on what bias is and how it works. Therefore, it is time to apply it to the real world. You might be thinking, but why, Miss Garcia? Haven't we been focusing on this for 2 days? Oh my God, 2 days is so long. It's like forever. But I agree. Yes, it is. We have been doing this for 2 days, but I need to make sure that you really get it, and the best way to check if you really understand something is to apply it to the real world. So this is actually, The Real World is a show on MTV. I don't know if they still show it, but it was one of my favorite shows when I was growing up. But that definitely was a show that had a whole bunch of biases in it. So now I really want you to try to apply that to the real world. So therefore, I'm going to share a real life happened to me short story with you and identify the biases I encountered within my experience. Then I will ask you to provide me a short story of your own that highlights a time when you experienced bias or biases in real life. So I know you're like, no, I don't want to provide any stories. I don't want to write. We've been writing, blah. But it is English class and we're going to be writing a lot. And I warned you of that in the beginning. So it begins. So the task may not be easy. It may even be uncomfortable. However, I am asking you to step outside your comfort zone and reflect on what you've learned and how it applies to your own life. There's going to be a lot of times in English that some of the connections are going to be hard. Even for me as an adult, sometimes when I make connections to a text, it's painful or it makes me uncomfortable. But I would never ask you to do something that I would not do myself. And sometimes that's when you get the best experience with the text, is when you make those types of connections. So again, I would never ask you to do something I would not do. Hence, I will share my story first because we can do this together. And to show you I'm really in this with you, here's a photo of me and my cousin David a month after the story takes place. You may laugh. I do. He used to laugh at this picture as well when he's about a month younger than me, and we both admitted that we look like dorks. So this is me, Miss Garcia, when I was in 7th grade, and that's when this story takes place. And just so you know, I feel like this sharing of this picture should buy me some major social capital with you. I'm just saying, I really should be your favorite teacher by now. So let's take a look at my story below. So it's bias in the real world. Do you ride a sleigh? So when I was in 7th grade, my stepdad decided it would be a good idea to move me, my little sister, and mother to his hometown for 2 months. He planned it this way because we were moving to Germany the next spring and wanted to spend time with his family before he left. What is important to note is that his hometown is St. Albans in northern Vermont, close to the Canadian border, and that he had us live there in December and January. Let me just say it was cold, colder than I had ever experienced in my life, and it made me miserable. The cold, however, was more tolerable than some of the crazy questions I was forced to endure by my peers and teachers alike. See, St. Albans is small, super small, and they do not get many new people in their town, much less new people that looked like me or were from another state. And I'm not just from any state, I was from Texas. This brown-haired, brown-eyed, darker-skinned Texas Mexican girl, wrapped in coats and scarves from head to toe, was something very new to the students at the only school in town, and they were naturally curious, but their biases quickly began to show. Just a quick note, this is not Miss Garcia, but that's kind of what I looked like because it was cold. So, the first experience I could tolerate as it came from a tiny second grader. I was talking to a staff member asking for directions to my class as this tiny little second grader stared at me in wonder. Soon, her curiosity got the best of her and she blurted out, "How do you know English?" With a sigh, I simply replied, "English is the only language I know," and I walked away. Silly second grader. The second incident, though, left me dumbfounded. It was in my Vermont history class, and as the teacher announced that a new student was in the class, he turned to me and smiled. As I stood there, he pointed towards me and said, "She is from Texas, and Texas is very different from Vermont." Fair enough, Texas is very different from Vermont, especially in the winter. "Andrea," he continued, "in Texas, do you ride horses to school?" I was confused. Horses? To school? I hadn't been on a horse since I was 7 years old. Before I could stop myself, I gave a quick retort. "Do you ride sleighs to school?" He looked confused and replied, "No, that is silly. Why would I do that?" My sassy self answered, "It is silly. You know what else is silly? Riding a horse to school." I rode the bus like everyone else and sat down. Needless to say, my mother got a call about my attitude, but to me it was clear their bias was showing. So that's my story. It very much did happen. Those were only two of the crazy questions that I got while I lived there in Vermont. I would like to visit Vermont again one day, but from what I understand, the town is still extremely small and they probably still would stick out like a sore thumb there. So, the biases within my story. Bias number one was that the second grader thought all Latinos speak Spanish. Just because I am Mexican, the girl assumed I spoke Spanish. This is a common bias and I have encountered almost on a weekly basis since then, honestly. The perception is that all Latinos speak Spanish when in fact there are whole generations that do not. And later within the year, I'll explain to you why I don't speak Spanish, nor do my parents. So it is something that I will share with you later. The second bias is that all Texans ride horses. It turned out that the teacher had never been outside his small town and had watched way too many Westerns. The perception that all Texans ride horses does not account for the fact that Texas, like the rest of the United States, has advanced with the times and has the same transportation options as everyone else. So if you've never been outside your little town, your state, and all you watch is these movies that portray Texas as this like Western area where we walk around with cowboy hats and cowboy boots and we ride horses, you might not realize that that was something that was not common. So you also have to remember my age, and during this time, especially for both of these, there was no social media. So the only access people had were things like the television. And at that time, that was the way Texas was portrayed. So now that I'm older, I'm not too upset with his bias. I can understand it. I wish he had not asked me in front of the entire class. But I can kind of see where he's coming from. But at the time, I was offended. I'm not going to lie. So that's my story. And were their biases about me correct? Absolutely not. But now it's your turn. You're going to tell me your story. This one is actually due Thursday because I would like to have a little bit more time to review it. And you can find all the requirements under Bias in the Real World Schoology assignment. So let's take a look at that so that you know exactly what you're doing. So here is the assignment. Here's the PDF version of my story if you do need it and you'd like to mark it up or do whatever. But here's the assignment, Bias in the Real World. So within your story, you're going to demonstrate how a bias affected you for good or bad, because sometimes those biases work in your advantage. So you're going to make sure to include at least one bias. You're going to explain the bias or biases and see my example on the Schoology page. It does need to be at least 150 words. And even though this is a rough draft quick write, try your best to adhere or follow grammar rules. So this is different from the something to ponder. Remember, the something to ponder, I wasn't really paying attention to grammar too much. I really wanted thought. This one I want both thought and grammar rules. You are going to submit your assignment. In person, you're going to complete the essay below and turn in as a virtual learner. And the virtual learners, you will go ahead and use the submit button and then the create box. You're actually going to type your text here. I do not want you to use a Word document right now because there's a certain way I want you to set up your Word documents, and I'm going to teach that to you next week. So for right now, what you'll do is you'll hit the submit assignment. This is both for in-person and virtual learners. You're going to hit your submit button and then create, and you're going to put it here. Now, if you do not have access to any technology, go ahead and write it on paper, and when I get there on Thursday, I will take a picture with my document camera and we'll go ahead and upload it that way. So if you have any questions, as always, feel free to ask. I can't wait to see you tomorrow, and hopefully everything's going well. Bye, guys.